has been an enemy of the state since the first federal law was enacted against it in 1937. Since that time, 20 million Americans have been arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for using the most popular drug in the world.
Your Honor, in this case, the state waives trial of the defendant, Ralph Wiley. It is convinced that he is hopelessly and incurably insane, a condition caused by the drug marijuana to which he was addicted.
The law is only one deterrent, and not that effective. The government relied on something else: education films.
This harmless-looking cigarette is cloaked in many innocent disguises. But light the match, inhale the smoke, and it becomes an invitation to your own murder.
They had to now control something that was growing all over the United States as a weed. So they relied mostly on words because they didn't have many other resources to devote to it. I think a lot of people have seen Reefer Madness.
That's bitter. That's more like it. I know you like that. Really, you will. Now just take a puff.
Though marijuana is now a household name, there was a time when it was an obscure drug, used only by the fringes of society. That, some argue, is the reason why it was criminalized.
Drugs are illegal because they do cause problems. The ones that are illicit drugs cause health problems, crime-related problems, violence-related problems, but it's also true that none of the drugs currently illegal became illegal before they were most closely associated with what were commonly regarded as deviant groups.
One of the girls was telling me about a new cigarette that peps you up.
Oh, you mean reefers?
Yes, that's the name of them.
Would you like to try one?
Sure, why not? I'm supposed to be on the loose.
Okay.
Marijuana's trip from a weed to America's archenemy in a $400 billion drug war begins with its chemistry. Smoking pot draws the active ingredient delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, into the lungs and onto the brain. There it suppresses the neurons, causing a distortion of perception and time, a lack of coordination, and sometimes uncontrollable hilarity. Within 4 seconds of the first drag, muscles relax, eyes redden, pulse rate quickens, euphoria, heightened sensitivity, or paranoid feelings arise in the user, an experience that dates back to the dawn of time.
Herodotus records some of the earliest uses of cannabis by the Scythians, and what they did was they would build a big bonfire in the middle of the camp, and they would heap a bunch of marijuana on top of it, and then they would throw a tent over it, and they would all go under the tent and breathe the smoke. And that way they consumed it.
Next to opium, marijuana is one of the planet's oldest medicines. Ancient Chinese herbalists applied it to stomach pain, menstrual cramps, malaria, and consumption. According to Indian mythology, Shiva, the Hindu goddess of creation and destruction, endowed man with the plant for a joyful pastime. An apt legacy for the drug of the generation that preached free love, challenged authority, and was out to change the world. Cannabis grows anywhere but the Arctic Circle. The earliest record of its use begins in ancient China and India. From the east, cannabis migrated to the rest of the world. Arab traders brought it from the Ganges Valley to North Africa and Spain. From Spain, the conquistadors carried it to the Americas. It was a prized source of fiber for rope and canvas, essential ingredients for ships. In fact, the word canvas comes from the Latin cannabis. But it was another conqueror who introduced the plant to Europe. 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte triumphs in Egypt. During the conquest, his army is introduced to an intoxicant unseen in Europe. Unlike in France, where intoxicants are drunk, this one is smoked. The soldiers fancy cannabis over brandy because it doesn't cause hangovers and carry it back to France as a spoil of war. In Paris, it finds favor with the bohemian set, with artists, authors, students, and prostitutes. The poet Baudelaire writes under its spell.
One must be forever drunken if you would not feel the horrible burden of time that bruises your shoulders and bends you to the earth. You must be drunken without cease, with wine, with poetry, with what you please. Be drunken without end.
From Paris, it travels to London as a smoking substance and an extract in medicine. Ladies of high society eat hashish confections to lower fevers, ease stomach pains, or any ache at all. Even a queen finds a use for the drug.
Queen Victoria used it for menstrual cramps. It was used for insomnia, especially for tuberculosis patients who had lost their appetites. It was also used recreationally.
The drug's next stop is New York, where cannabis and hashish become one of the many ingredients in America's unregulated patent medicine industry. The writer Fritz Hugh Ludlow uses it as a recreational intoxicant after first taking it for a toothache. With continued use, Ludlow becomes addicted. He writes about his experience in Diary of a Hashish Eater in 1857.
When I shut my eyes, I dwelt in a delicious land of dreams. On the wings of a speechless music, I floated through the air, and in the cloud valleys played hide and seek with meteors.
Sometimes these accounts magnified and glamorized the drug experience and encouraged many people to follow suit. Interestingly enough, Fitzhugh Ludlow became one of the most ardent and earliest supporters of drug regulation through law in the 19th century, writing quite a few stories for Harper's and for various popular magazines on drug addiction in the United States, trying to bring awareness to it.
Congratulations! Now you'll start living!
My head is so light it feels like it's floating.
That's because your troubles are all gone. Try another puff.
In the 19th century, marijuana was far from the recreational drug of a future time. By and large, its only use comes from patent medicines. Americans know little of smoking it as an intoxicant, a custom widespread in the East. That is until Abdul Hamid II, Sultan of Turkey, makes a very special birthday gift to the American people. 1876. A World's Exposition is held in Philadelphia to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. On display are the wonders of the modern world, among them the telephone and the personal printing press, otherwise known as the typewriter. The industrial age has arrived. At the Turkish pavilion, the Sultan Abdul Hamid II makes a gift of a rare and exotic treat. The crowd is introduced to smoking marijuana in what may have been the first pot party in the United States, and perhaps the biggest, until Woodstock 93 years later. The Sultan's gift ignites a wave of Yankee ingenuity. Seeing dollar signs in another idle pleasure, entrepreneurs opened Turkish smoking parlors in the north.
Sometimes people would go to these places in great secrecy, sort of as a lark, and there'd be society matrons as well as prominent businessmen, and they would either smoke hashish or eat hashish-laced confections.
At a time when the temperance movement is trying to ban alcohol and close saloons, smoking parlors could have been the alternative way to get high. But the parlors close. Liquor, not cannabis, continues to be the country's drug of choice until a constitutional amendment bans booze and America rediscovers marijuana. New Orleans, 1920. America's second largest port is America's #1 party city. In this brawling place, where blacks, French Cajun, Spanish, American, Europeans, and Chinese live, work, and play, a new music emerges out of the constant clash and commotion of culture. The music is jazz. Marijuana and jazz go together like a melody and lyrics. Where jazz goes, reefers follow. But there's another reason for its widespread use. In 1920, it is the only legal drug in town. Even here, where everything the flesh desires can be had, prohibition keeps the flow of liquor out of sight. The choice of a new intoxicant becomes the perfectly legal weed, shipped in from the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America, and sold like cigarettes in jazz clubs, markets, and pharmacies. It is cheap and popular. But even in paradise, there's trouble. New Orleans is in the midst of a crime wave. Murder dominates the headlines and attracts William Randolph Hearst's attention, eager for a sensational story to sell.
New Orleans was a sort of a source, the beginning of concern about marijuana. They saw it as linked to crime, violent crime, or even predatory crime. Also, sometimes it seemed to be related to murders, to rape, and so on.
Hearst coins the phrase marijuana menace and prints lurid tales about the drug's capacity to cause rape, murder, and mayhem. Just as reports of cocaine-crazed Negroes a decade ago had stirred lawmakers to ban cocaine, headlines and stories of the marijuana menace were affecting cannabis the same way.
Society worries about its members who are not in control of their mind. So in order to prevent chaos in society, limit the use of the product or the thing that's inducing those kinds of effects.
State lawmakers were quick to ban a drug that they identified with black violence. In 1924, Louisiana joins 14 other states banning the distribution of marijuana for non-medical purposes.
And it gets back to the scapegoat. So you can scapegoat different racial groups, you can scapegoat the lower classes, you can use the drug to do the scapegoating for you. You can attack them because they're using the drug.
Slowly and surely, it will be banned across the country, state by state, for one reason or another. In the Southwest, the reason for a ban on pot was economics and prejudice.
They were worried about all these Mexicans down on the Texas border who were, it was the depths of the Depression. And these Mexicans had been a very useful labor force in the 20s when we needed them, but now as the Depression, you got all these gringos in the bread line. You sure as hell don't need all these Mexicans. So how could we stigmatize them and get rid of this cheap labor force and get them out of here?
According to the San Antonio Gazette, quote, "The men who smoke this herb become excited to such an extent that they go through periods of near frenzy and worse. It is always aggressive as the crimes which have been committed in garrisons, armories, barracks, and the humble suburbs of Mexico." In 1931, Mexican repatriation becomes law. Mexicans who don't go quietly are subject to varying forms and degrees of harassment. Many are charged with vagrancy. Others are arrested for violation of new state marijuana laws that are often an excuse to drive Mexicans out of the country.
So in Texas, for example, if you got caught with one joint, you could get sent to